prophet Samuel is mentioned in the Bible as one of the prominent spiritual leaders of the Israelites. Perhaps this is why this site, associated with the tomb of Samuel, is sacred to the three monotheistic faiths.
Nebi Samuel is one of the most fascinating sites in the Holy Land. We have here layers of history, layers of bloodshed, layers of wars. Everything happened here. Now you look out, we're about 900 meters above sea level. It's one of the highest mountains around Jerusalem. And from here you can see Jerusalem over here in the foreground, over there on the horizon. And you see that Jerusalem is in the basin. And this is the high ground. This is a strategically important place. And it became a very holy place, a very sacred place, because many stories of the Bible happened here. And one of the main stories is that this is the site where tradition believes that the prophet Samuel was buried.
Tradition says that this hilltop on the outskirts of Jerusalem is the biblical city of Mitzpeh, where the prophet Samuel anointed Saul as king, a scene described in Samuel 1.
So Nebi Samuel is associated with Samuel even by the time he was living. It was here the people of Israel came to him and they said, Prophet Samuel, you're getting to be an old man. We want you to appoint us a king. We want to have a king like all the other kingdoms. And he says, do you know what will happen if you have a king? You will have taxes. He will take your daughters. He will take your best wines and your olives. He will take your sons and make them into soldiers. And they say, no, we want the king. So Samuel goes to the Lord, and the Lord says to him, Samuel, it's not you they're rejecting, it's me they're rejecting. They want a king, let them have a king. So he goes out and he sends emissaries out and he finds a fellow, his name is Saul, he's a Benjamite, and he makes him into the king. He anoints him quietly, and then he assembles all the tribes of Israel here in Mitzpeh. He says, I have found you a king. And he reads out, and this is what we read into the Bible, and he says, do you see the one whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people acclaimed him, shouting, long live the king.
This place is also linked to another famous Israelite ruler, King Solomon.
King Solomon has just inherited his kingdom from his father David. And he decides he's going to have a big sacrifice to the Lord. He comes over to this place overlooking the valley of Gibeon, and he sees this big altar here. And on this altar, this very altar, King Solomon, he sacrifices 1,000 burnt offerings. And the Lord asks Solomon, what do you want? And he says to the Lord, you know, to rule over these people, I don't want treasures or anything like that. I want you to give me wisdom. And the Lord says, wisdom? You know what? I could have killed your enemies. I could have given you all sorts of treasures, vast kingdoms. But you know what? I'll give you wisdom. And to top it off, I'm going to give you treasures as well.
It is unclear if this site was actually the biblical city of Mitzpeh or the burial site of Samuel, but these traditions developed throughout the years and added to the glamour of Nebi Samuel, a few kilometers from the holy city of Jerusalem.
So Uri, Nebi Samuel sits on a very strategic site. Many layers of history here. We have the first temple period right here, and on top of that we see these houses from the second temple period built on top of them, and they all share the same sort of water systems.
Nebi Samuel continued to flourish during the Byzantine era and played a significant role during the time of the Crusaders.
So Uri, this is the Crusader pit of Nebi Samuel. This place we're walking on here was a street in the Crusader period. It was covered with a vault. And this is the place, Nebi Samuel was the place where the Crusaders came, and later the Christian pilgrims. And it was from here they got their first glimpse of Jerusalem, the holy city. And they called it Mount Joy. Now later on in the Crusader era, in the end of the 12th century, Richard the Lionhearted came here and he fought with Saladin. He was able to defeat Saladin in Arsuf and in Jaffa, but when he came to Nebi Samuel, he looked out at Jerusalem and he knew he didn't have enough forces to conquer Jerusalem, and he started to cry. And from that moment, it became known as the Mount of Tears.
It's also a good example of the coexistence which was in the area between Muslims, Jews, and Christians.
This is a magnificent Crusader-era church from the 12th century, and it's one of just a very few, only 4 survived after the Muslim conquest of the Crusaders. You know why it survived? Because the Muslims turned this church into a mosque, and they still use it today.
But despite these examples, Nebi Samuel was also a prime location for wars and conflicts in the past. Some of the most famous battles of the region took place right here.
Because of its height, Nebi Samuel has always been a strategic point and the site of many battles over the centuries, from ancient times into the 20th century. In 1917, the British Army came here and they had a huge battle with the Turkish Army on their way to capture Jerusalem. In 1948, the Jordanians built these trenches, and there was a terrible bloody battle where 37 Palmach soldiers were killed here. In 1967, an armored brigade passed through Nebi Samuel, fighting here on its way to North Jerusalem.
Aside from being an archaeological and historic site, Nebi Samuel is also an attraction for those making wishes. This tradition is also associated with Samuel the prophet and his mother.
This is the Spring of Hana. It's underneath the ruins of Nebi Samuel, and it's called the Spring of Hana because Hana was the mother of Samuel. She was barren. Read in the Bible that she was barren and she prayed to God for a child. So today, people who are barren, women, they come here and they continue that tradition and they pray here to be conceived with children.
The prophet Samuel's death saw a division within the Israelite leadership. After his passing, Samuel continued to be a source of inspiration as his prophecies echoed throughout history.